CTBK is more than just a full-service accounting firm. They are one team with an innovative approach to accounting and rise to each new challenge with collaborative problem-solving skills. CTBK goes above and beyond by lending helping hands in the Buffalo and Niagara communities through volunteer work and donations, and is partnered up with Victory Sports for 2022 to help keep kids in the community active. The professionals at CTBK are determined to help individuals and businesses succeed. Whether a large corporation, a small business, or somewhere in between, call CTBK at 716-630-2400 and see what CTBK's one-team approach can do for you. Welcome to another edition of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with my co-host Jonah Bronstein of the New Bronstein Times. And we have, a lot to talk about. Ryan Miller night. Just last night, Jonah was there. I was unable to attend. I was on deadline finishing a story on Dominic Hasek. So I was unable to attend Ryan Miller night, which is kind of strange. But the Bills, they're going to host the Bengals 3 p.m. Sunday in Highmark Stadium, second round of the playoffs. And I want to start there, Jonah, because the location of the game has been newsworthy, and the location of other games in the playoffs also. After Damar Hamlin's cardiac arrest canceled that game in week 17, there were rules on the books that said that you go to win percentages in the event that not every team can play the maximum number of games or the same number of games into deciding tiebreakers. And the NFL owners voted on it and came away with a system that apparently pleases no one, which is classic NFL decision-making. I haven't asked you about it, really. We haven't really talked about the format that was concocted to make up for the fact that the Bengals and the Bills played only 16 games and everybody else played 17. What are your thoughts on what the NFL postseason schedule makers came up with, having Bengals at Bills and then a neutral site game in the event that the Bills and Chiefs were to meet in the AFC Championship?
Well, as you alluded to, there really was no perfect solution. No matter how it shook out, there would have been at least one of these three teams that felt aggrieved, and their fan bases that they didn't get the opportunity to play their way into home field advantage or a certain number of home games in the playoffs. If it were completely up to me, I probably would have came up with this sort of solution, if not maybe just going by winning percentage and having the seeds and having that championship game in Kansas City. But I don't really hate the idea of a neutral site game, because that doesn't really favor either team. It is a neutral site. It's almost similar to the college football playoffs, where every team plays in a bowl game in a neutral field. On the other hand, the Bills are, it turns out, fortunate in this regard. Not fortunate that what happened to Damar Hamlin and the emotional trauma that the players and the organization had to go through, but in the football sense, they could have very well lost that game to the Bengals and been the third seed and had to go play this game on the road. Now, without winning that game, and in fact, they were losing that game at the time, they get treated as if they won the game and do have the home field advantage and get a home game, which is good for the Bills and their competitive aspects, but also good for Western New York and the frenzy and the fervor that comes with home playoff games that have become more frequent in the last few years, but were very infrequent for several decades, and it creates a fun atmosphere in town. So from my Buffalo, Western New York perspective, it's kind of cool that the Bills are hosting this playoff game. But yeah, competitively, I do think the Bengals have a gripe, the Bengals and their fans, about not having the opportunity to earn this home game. And the Bengals could have even possibly earned the number one seed and home field advantage, and that suspended and ultimately canceled game prevented that from happening. But at the same time, you just go and win the game. Win on the road, win on the neutral field. I feel like the best team is going to win the AFC and go to the Super Bowl regardless of the location of the games.
Yeah, I guess my big takeaway is that all fans are insufferable. And it's been that way for the last couple of weeks. Bills fans are whining about that they deserve this, and Bengals fans should STFU. And oh, by the way, I'm tired of people talking about Patrick Mahomes. Our Josh is better. I mean, it's just been this cauldron of sniping back and forth of all these fan bases. But a big part of this, the stew that's within this cauldron is this complaining over who's getting jobbed on the playoff locations. And yeah, maybe I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I did want to state for the record, because it has been such a topic and I hadn't spoken to you about it. I just wanted to get your thoughts. My take on it is that the NFL should have acted consistently throughout the playoffs in terms of win percentages and all the different permutations that could come out. I see it as the Bills, and this is rare for Bills fans to experience getting two breaks. You get a break by having the Bengals here, in which the NFL is going to enforce the win percentage aspect of the rules, but then they're not going to enforce the win percentage aspect against the Chiefs. And part of that has to do with, I'm guessing, that the NFL decision makers saying that the Bills beat the Chiefs during the regular season. So there was a head-to-head aspect to it there. Meanwhile, the Bengals are wondering, well, we didn't get our chance to have our head-to-head. We beat the Chiefs also. And we didn't get our chance to play the Bills, even though it wasn't our fault. We did everything right. We were gracious hosts. We bent over backwards to make sure that Damar Hamlin and the Bills were taken care of and had their space. And we walk away with the disadvantage. And I will say this, we're having this discussion, by the way, and it must be noted, because Damar Hamlin's okay. I think that if Damar Hamlin is still in the hospital fighting for his life, or if there's a situation where we're not sure how he's going to be, then I think that I'm still in that same frame of mind that I was in a couple of weeks ago, where football doesn't even matter, and play the games, don't play the games. I don't care because I just wouldn't be in the mood to talk football. But he's out of the hospital. He's okay. He has been at the Bills facility. We see him smiling and having fun with his teammates. And I do know that John Warrow of the Associated Press did write a story today that talked about the long road that's still ahead for Damar Hamlin. So it's not as though he's, going to be golfing anytime soon, or running obstacle courses or signing up for triathlons. But the fact that he is out and seemingly going to be okay and healthy and has been an inspiration and helped raise a lot of money, and the NFLPA is honoring him as one of their finalists for their Alan Page Award, which is a prestigious honor that they give out every year for community service. We can have this discussion about football. And I think it does need to be said on occasion that, yes, the Bills were down 7-3, and in the playoffs, that doesn't mean anything. The Jacksonville Jaguars showed us that last week against the LA Chargers. But the Bengals, one of the most dangerous offenses in the NFL, the best receiving trio in the NFL, with their injured tight end freshly back, would have had to would have gone up against a Bills secondary, had this game continued, missing two starters out of their defensive backfield. Teron Johnson, who remained in the concussion protocol after the game, would not have been able to return if he was still limited with concussion issues after the game. He wouldn't have come back during the game. And Damar Hamlin was obviously no longer available to play. So since then, the Bengals have suffered a couple injuries on their offensive line. And the Bills are certainly going to enjoy that matchup much more than they would have if everybody were healthy, as they were entering week 17. So there are kinds of asterisks on this. And again, I think that every fan base has a case to make, but the whining of who deserves it gets a bit tiresome. I guess my bottom line is, again, I'll reiterate, I wish the NFL had just been consistent in how it decided the playoff matchups, as opposed to trying to put the round peg in the square hole for every possible matchup that involved the Bengals, Bills, and Chiefs. So
yeah, and right. And I would agree. I think that, and as you mentioned, there were rules in place and policies to handle these type of situations, especially a couple of years ago with the pandemic when they anticipated the possibility of games being canceled and not rescheduled, and they knew how that would be handled. And this is a different set of circumstances, but it could have been applied in much the same way. But when it comes down to it, these teams are in the playoffs. The Bengals won the AFC Championship game in Kansas City last year. Home field advantage is no guarantee in the playoffs, and you just got to play the hand you're dealt. You have a bit of an advantage from playing at home. Maybe a team like the Bengals gain some sort of advantage from feeling like, the obstacles in their way and they've been aggrieved, and that could be some sort of galvanizing and motivating factor. I'm more interested in kind of who has the mental and emotional edge in this matchup. You would probably assume it's the Bills because of what they've been through over the last couple of weeks, but we've talked in this podcast and many people have meant that perhaps there's an emotional letdown coming for that team. Maybe the Bengals feel like, they did a nice thing for the Bills in agreeing to suspend and not play that game, and they kind of want to come back out and take back what maybe them and their fans felt like they deserved by winning that game. It'll be interesting to see how this game plays out. It probably is just going to come down to who executes and plays better, but I think there's going to be an emotional edge factor, maybe just from the narrative standpoint, but depending on who wins the game, I think we'll be able to draw back to a couple weeks ago and how that prepared these teams in the non-physical sense for the challenge at hand.
There in the gamesmanship too, you mentioned the mental gymnastics that go forward with out underdogging the other team. And Joe Mixon, you pointed it off before we hit the record button. You pointed it out that, bitching about the neutral game site. Why am I'm fumbling here over my words all of a sudden. Maybe I'm having an episode, but so let me start over. You mentioned Joe Mixon before we hit the record button, and he is bitching that the NFL put tickets for sale for the AFC Championship game in Atlanta, which is only going to be taking place in Atlanta if the Bills and the Chiefs meet. Therefore, big snub towards the Bengals. What Joe Mixon also needs to realize is the Bengals have been selling tickets for a potential Jaguars matchup in the AFC Championship game because that's what has to happen. You need to sell the tickets ahead of time. There will be a refund, all that stuff. So, but it's the things that players go through, and Joe Mixon may very well know this, but he is going to raise that flag and see who salutes in terms of having a chip on the shoulder. And it's reminiscent of those, the ridiculous Michael Jordan offenses that were taken that we learned in the documentary about him of players who insulted him, and then they went and asked the player, and they said, "I never said anything to him." He would just invent something to be pissed off about because that's what got him going, or it's what got the guys in the locker room going. Is they're counting us out, fellas. Let's go out there and take it to them. The Patriots were kings of that. And I know I've mentioned that a gazillion times on the podcast and even in columns that I've written is, the years that Bill Belichick would take the Lombardi trophy from Robert Kraft, who just received it from Roger Goodell, and it's about to be handed to Tom Brady. But along the way, it's mentioned how everybody counted us out. Even though they were the preseason favorites to win the Super Bowl, they were favored to win every game in the playoffs, including the Super Bowl. But everybody counted them out. So it is fascinating, the sports psychology that goes into making sure that you enter a game feeling slighted and taken advantage of.
It's rather unique to sports, and maybe even unique to high level professional or very high level sports, because in a school or a workplace, they talk about bulletin board material. Usually a bulletin board is a bunch of positive, report card on the refrigerator, right, newspaper clips to try to inspire goodwill among your employees or your students or things like that. But in sports, the bulletin board is all the perceived slights and all the negative things in the newspaper or what another team might have said. And that's what you use for the motivation, instead of trying to motivate yourself by the positive praise that you might be receiving from your fans.
Every high school in the spring has a bulletin board somewhere that says where all their seniors are going to, whether they're joining the service or going off to college or getting into the Peace Corps or whatever. And there's just a pride mural of sorts saying where everybody is going. That would be tantamount to having a board in which all the rejection letters are put up there of all the colleges that were applied to and all the students got turned down. Go out there and get yours. Shove it up their asses, class of 23.
But maybe that would work. I mean, four teams do that because it's effective. I mean, I think you get people a little bit angry. There's a brain psychology and a nervous system reaction to being a little bit angry and a little bit pissed off and having something to prove that tends to play out on the field, and especially high-level professional athletes seeking that edge. The Bills are, I think, a classic example, but maybe most every good NFL team is like this. They play better when their backs are against the wall or they're fighting from underneath, and they can tell themselves, everybody counted us out and we had to prove you wrong. And when you are the great team with the home field advantage that everybody's expecting to win, it seems to work against you a little bit without having that, as you said, trying to out underdog the other team.
I don't really sense though that the Bills are doing that too much this week, are they?
No.
I think the fan base seems to be doing it, but I don't think the Bills. We haven't seen a lot of that type of talk coming out of one Bills drive over the last couple of weeks. They know they're the better team heading into last week's game against the Miami Dolphins, of course, and they're probably feeling to an extent that they're whistling past the graveyard after escaping Skylar Thompson and a Dolphins team that managed to score 31 points in bad weather. And here comes Joe Burrow and T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, Hayden Hurst, Joe Mixon to town. Granted, behind a ramshackle offensive line, and we can get into that. But yeah, I think that the Bills they're probably bracing up. I think they know that they dodged it, getting out of the first round with a performance that wouldn't have flown against any other team in the playoff field. They just happened to do it against the weakest team, at least on the AFC side.
Yeah, and they've become a little bit of America's darling favorite team with all these prayers on their side. It's very, very hard, I think, for the Bills right now to act like, nobody believes in us and you counted us out and we're proving you wrong. That's not really a mind frame. And I haven't heard the Bills even try to say things like this, but it's very hard for the Bills and even the fans to take that approach coming into these playoff games right now.
Any particular matchup that interests you, Jonah? I know that, we just talked about this game 3 weeks ago. Not too much has changed except for the offensive line. Let me give a reset on that just to give an idea of what people should be looking for in the game Sunday afternoon. The Bengals, as of 4 weeks ago, I think it was, had the most consistent offensive line in the NFL. They played every snap together. They started every game. And then their right tackle, L. Collins, was lost with a torn ACL. He's done for the year. And then in last week's game against the Baltimore Ravens, left tackle Jonah Williams dislocated his kneecap, which actually is an injury you can come back from. And he did earlier in the season, not missing any time, but he has been ruled out for this game. The left guard, Cordell Volson, and the center, Ted Karras, are consistent. They're going to stay. They're the only starters still left. And then, I skipped over. So Jonah Williams against the Ravens, and also Alex Kappa, the right guard, suffered an ankle injury in that first round playoff game. So again, only two starters remain: left guard Cordell Volson, center Ted Karras. These are names you're probably going to forget or have already forgotten in the 10 seconds since I said them. But the players who are coming in to fill in have NFL experience. They've started before. The right tackle, Hakeem Adeniji, actually started in the Super Bowl last year at guard. He played throughout the playoffs for them, so he has experience. Jackson Carman at left tackle has experience. Max Sharping at right guard has experience, but not much this year. So getting limited reps. these guys are going to have to rely probably more on film study than they are the sharpness of the NFL season, being 20 weeks into it. Hopefully they've been paying attention in practice and doing their work off to the side and in the weight room and conditioning and eating right and doing all that stuff. If you're a Bengals fan, I'm saying that. If you're a Bills fan, you're like, bring on these scrubs because they were unable to start for somebody else. Go ahead and throw these guys in there and let's see what Ed Oliver and Greg Rousseau and Boogie Basham can do against these guys.
I mean, yeah, that's the big matchup. The Bills' defensive line and front seven and their ability to create pressure and disrupt Joe Burrow and take that tremendous wide receiver trio out of the game because Burrow doesn't have the time and comfort to get
Joe Burrow,
the ball.
just to point out, the fastest release in the NFL in terms of time from snap to either getting rid of the ball or getting hit. So he gets rid of it faster than anybody else. But when you're talking tenths of a second, Max Sharping instead of Alex Kappa and Jackson Carman instead of Jonah Williams can make a significant difference.
And the Bills haven't been getting a lot of sacks lately, but I was reading that they have been generating pressures and hits at a bit of a higher rate since Von Miller went out of the lineup. And that could be matchup based in the teams they played, and it's a small sample size. But
I don't think that's true. Well, there is some truth to that, Jonah. I had just looked up the numbers. Heather Prusak and I are going to talk about that on the Channel 4 Buffalo Kickoff Live preview show Sunday morning. So I happen to have those stats fresh in my head. That's true, but it's coming from the linebackers. It's because since Von Miller's injury, Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds are being used as pass rushers, not a lot, but way more than they were before Von Miller was hurt. So instead of Matt Milano averaging maybe 1 or 2 pass rushes every couple games, he's now averaging 4 a game. And Tremaine Edmonds is up to maybe 2 a game or 3 a game. And that is helping. But from a player-to-player pass rush efficiency rating, they're mostly down. On the defensive line, that is.
Okay. Fair, and Daquan Jones and Jordan Phillips are both questionable, which would have a small impact, but could have a little bit of an impact on the rotational depth in the Bills' front seven. And if you are rushing more linebackers, that can expose you in coverage to a team that has multiple good receivers, which will make it harder to double team and take one receiver out of the game. There's going to be openings probably in the middle of the field with the second and third wide receivers. So it is that chess match of the defensive play calling and how often you blitz and send linebackers and things like that is going to be the game within the game. I think the weather is something I'm going to watch for to see how much of a factor it is because, one, we don't really know how much adverse weather is going to affect the game. There could be some snow. There could be some rain. It could be a little bit. It could be a lot. Traditionally, you would think the Bills are in a good position when they play in the snow or in poor weather in home games in the playoffs, but it hasn't necessarily been the case with Josh Allen at quarterback and the wide open spread out offense. And the Bengals have been a good team at running the ball with Joe Mixon. So I would think that a snow game or a weather game would favor the Bengals a little bit, but with this banged up offensive line, maybe they aren't able to run the ball, or maybe that's not. It could favor them. Maybe with these backup linemen, a more smash mouth type game might help them get into a rhythm, and they won't have to worry about blitz pickup and the continuity and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see what the weather is and if that affects the game. And I don't really know if it's going to favor the Bills or the Bengals, but it might one way or the other.
Yeah, I have the numbers here in front of me regarding pass rushing. Entering week 12, which is when Von Miller got hurt on Thanksgiving Day in Detroit, the team pressure rate, and this comes from Pro Football Focus, was 11.8%. That ranked 5th in the NFL. From week 13 on, and the reason I remove week 12 from the scenario is because now the Bills, this involves game plans that factor Von Miller not being on the field. Your personnel is different going into the game, et cetera, et cetera. So I eliminated week 12. So entering week 12, 11.8%, 5th in the league. From week 13 on, including last week's playoff game, team pressure went down 2 full points, 9.9%, 20th in the NFL over that span. Now, I was incorrect. Greg Rousseau personally has gone up from 14.5% before the injury to 16.7. AJ Epinesa is up slightly from 10.5 to 10.7. Everybody else has kind of cratered. Ed Oliver went from 13% to 6.7%. Jaquan Jones went from 8.2% to 7.1%. Shaq Lawson went from 10% to 6.7%. Jordan Phillips, Boogie Basham went from 9.4% to 9.0%. And then Jordan Phillips, who was at 9.2% before Miller's injury, just hasn't had enough pass rushes to really register from week 13 on because he hasn't been on the field. And then just real quickly, the numbers. Matt Milano, through 9 games, he had pass rushed only 19 times. In the last 6 games, he's pass rushed 31 times. So 5 times a game as opposed to twice a game. Edmonds through 8 games, 14 times. In the last 6 games, 25 times. So they're getting after it in different ways because they have to get that much more creative without Von Miller, who, for the record, was their best defensive lineman in terms of pass rush rate at 15.7%. Before he the week before heading into the game in which he got injured. So 4 full points, percentage points over the league average, I believe, at that point. So yeah, that's big. And of course, how the Bills are going to defend. You mentioned the weather there, Jonah. I don't know. I mean, the Bengals can practice in this. They have cold weather too. I don't really see the weather being a factor or hurting the Bengals. But then again, did it really hurt the Dolphins? It didn't hurt them in the playoff game, and it didn't hurt them in the late season game either in terms of putting up points. But yeah, Cincinnati
the weather
been pretty
might
nasty.
Might help the Bengals.
In what way do you think?
Well, just in general, I think the Bills have been better offensively in good weather than bad weather over the last couple of seasons. Josh Allen in the passing attack, and the Bengals have been a good running team. And the Bills are running the ball better of late, but not really known as a team that likes to run the ball a lot and likes to base their offense and have a lot of success attacking defenses that way. But with the offensive line injuries, maybe that doesn't suit the Bengals that well right now. That's why I said I don't really know if the weather is going to have a factor and what way it will, but I think it could favor the Bengals and then the strengths of their team, the balance of their team, as opposed to the Bills, who are a little less balanced offensively.
Ryan Miller night, you were there. I unfortunately was not. I would love to have gone. That was the team that I covered so long ago. A lot of guys coming back to the arena who I haven't had contact with in many, many years. What was it like, I guess, just to be in the arena? The ceremony was great from what I saw on television. It looked fantastic. It looked like they hit all the right chords and nothing was left out. And just looked all in all to be a terrific night with the team actually coming through with a dramatic overtime victory over the New York Islanders.
Yeah, it was a bit of an electric atmosphere. The Sabres did a good job over the last couple of weeks of reminding people to get there early and when the ceremony was going to start, and trying to have everybody in their seats in a full building.
How was that? Because I did see people looking rather nervous on Twitter that there weren't enough people in their seats as 7 o'clock or as 6 o'clock was approaching.
Right. And I saw some chatter on Twitter about parking and traffic, and people were trying to get there early and maybe had a little bit of an inability getting in the door quite on time. And the ceremony started on time, but it did seem to me, I took a picture at about 6:05 and the building looked pretty full. Now at 5:50, when they asked everybody to be in their seats, it wasn't very full. Now, a lot of people might have been in the concourse kind of waiting for the lights to go out and to take their seats, but it did seem like the building filled up very quickly in that 10-15 minute span. And by the time you really got into the meat of the ceremony, it seemed like everybody was there. Maybe the little bit of intro on the video scoreboard, some people were arriving late for that, but by the time Rick Jeanneret introduced Ryan Miller and Ryan Miller made his speech and the banner went up and everything like that, it did seem like everybody was there, and it was a full building. And it was a full building an hour before the game, and then it was an overtime game, and it didn't seem like anybody left. So it didn't seem like the energy in the crowd waned at all. The Sabres came back to win the game, but had a huge advantage in shot attempts and shots on goal, and were dominating the flow of the game throughout, and the crowd was into it. And it helped a little bit that the Sabres were behind and the fans felt like they had to cheer the team on, but the energy stayed consistent and strong from 6 o'clock through when the game ended, sometime around 10 o'clock. And it was an electric atmosphere throughout from start to finish.
A very smart hockey friend of ours reached out to me last night during the ceremony and said, was Ryan Miller really this good? And it was a pointed rhetorical question because obviously his numbers being raised to the rafters. But I think in listening to Rick Jeanneret's speech and some of the commentary, it was like, yeah, he was good, but our friend's take was that they're trying to make him seem as though he's Hasek's peer. Did you get a sense, or in listening to some of the testimonial and the commentary last night, that that maybe they were trying a little too hard to balance that scale?
I mean, I don't know if anybody with a straight face could say Ryan Miller is as good as Dominik Hasek. Even Ryan Miller probably doesn't think that. And Dominik Hasek might be polite and say something like that, but he doesn't think that either. It was nice that Dominik Hasek recorded a video and gave some praise for Ryan Miller, because I don't know, did you hear that, 10, 15 years ago, was Dominik Hasek the type of guy that said nice things about Ryan Miller?
Dominik Hasek wasn't saying nice things about Buffalo 15 years ago.
Exactly.
If you recall, the first time he retired from the Detroit Red Wings, he said, I retire a Detroit Red Wing and I will always be a Detroit Red Wing. And the reason I know this is because, as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, I was working on a story for our NHL 99 series at The Athletic, in which we're counting down it's the 100 greatest players, but we call it 99. It's a Gretzky thing. But anyway, in Hasek, I'm writing the Hasek story, and I came across a story by a young sports writer by the name of Tim Graham, who was writing about Hasek's retirement. And the lead was he didn't mention the Sabres until somebody asked him about it in the Q&A portion of his news conference. And he kind of dismissed that question. So yes, I think that the embrace has happened since retirement. The ice has thawed. The Regises, of course, no longer being in ownership. Darcy Regier no longer being the general manager. There's all kinds of things, water under the bridge type stuff. But yeah, there was a time in which Dominik Hasek would not have allowed any kind of graciousness towards anyone with the Sabres, and would not have given a nod to anyone, even his good friend Marty Baron, I don't think.
Right. And it was nice to see him come around and participate in that. And I think that was maybe the most memorable, not the most memorable aspect of the night, but in terms of the testimonies and the tributes from other players, probably the most striking and memorable player that participated and had something nice to say. And he said, welcome to the club. And he kind of acknowledged Ryan Miller, if not his equal, the next best thing. And, the two great goalies in the modern history of the franchise.
Dominik Hasek, though, isn't like Bruce Smith. You interview Bruce Smith about pass rushers. He'll always bring it back to why he was better than whoever you're talking about. Hey, man, we played a 3-4 defense, and I never had anybody on the other side who got sacks, and I was always getting double teamed, and I was going up against this and that. And so you do that with Bruce Smith. Hasek's not like that. Like, he doesn't. I think he gave begrudging praise when he was playing because that was his edge, much like you hear about Bob Gibson. Bob Gibson had no friends in Major League Baseball until he retired. And then he was best. And then people were like, who's this guy? And it was because he was like, hey, you were the enemy. And I needed to do that to get myself ready to go every 4 nights. And I think Hasek has some of that in him too, that once he retired, Hasek's heroes. I mean, he's still a big part of the community. He comes back a lot. He's donated millions and millions of dollars to Western New York. So there is that. But again, I know that I'm dithering or quibbling here, but it was while he played that I think he would not have given the Sabres any kind of credit but when he retired, I think that all fell away.
And to get back to your question, I mean, you covered him in this era and I didn't. So, I mean, I think you could answer better, how great was Ryan Miller compared to the goaltending peers of his time and Dominic Hasek and others like that. But he was a very good goaltender. I don't think anybody would dispute that. He
won the Vezina.
Won the Vezina and was an all-star 4 or 5 times, I believe. And was
the goalie of the U.S. Olympic team, which is
exactly
super symbolic.
And I think the all-time winningest American-born goaltender in NHL history. And he is the Sabres all-time winningest goaltender. If he's not the best goaltender, he has at least that feather in his cap is the one that had the most victories and the most success. He was here. He played 11 seasons in Buffalo, and he was good in almost every one of those seasons. And the Sabres were a good team in many, many of those seasons, if not quite all of those seasons. And he was popular, and he was the face of the franchise at various points in his career during an era when the Sabres were good and exciting. He was the starting goaltender on a team that, went to the Eastern Conference Finals and had those moments that they did have. And if you're nostalgic for that black and red goat head era, Ryan Miller was one of the key figures in that era. So if you're going to put anybody's banner up to represent that period in Sabres history, he's probably the obvious choice. And
I think he's the only choice.
Right. And
I know that he's probably not the best. He's not the best player from those teams. I'm talking about those back-to-back Eastern Conference championship teams. I should say Eastern Conference final series. I got to be careful when I say champ because that makes it seem like they went to the Stanley Cup. They didn't. Hasek got to the Stanley Cup. Those teams only got to the Eastern Conference Finals in back-to-back years. And Lindy Ruff says, and I agree with him, that the 06 team is probably the best chance that the Sabres have ever had to win a Stanley Cup in the franchise history. Even though they did get to Game 6 of the 99 Cup Finals, that 06 team was so good before injuries hit them that Lindy Ruff, who coached both teams, bemoans that as the one that got away. But I do think, and we were talking about this before we hit the record button too, if there's who else deserves to be up in the rafters, and I don't think anybody from those teams, even Briere and Drury, as much as they meant, they weren't here long enough. Their departures were messy, not necessarily their fault. In fact, mostly not their fault, but they were not liked when they left. Not that should matter per se. I mean, Hasek was hated when he left. Hasek was hated when he was here. And he clearly deserves to have his number up there, and it is. But who else from those teams? I mean Briere, Drury are the names you go with. Vanek, you mentioned. Vanek played for 43 teams in the NHL alone. He just doesn't. What is he known for? Is he a Sabre? Vanek is somebody to me who belongs to the entire league more than he does the Sabres. Danny Briere, I remember as a Flyer, and you probably remember Drury more as a with the Avalanche, where he won a cup and Rookie of the Year and all that stuff. I don't know. As fun as those teams were, I think Ryan Miller's it.
Yeah, and some of those guys that came back and spoke last night, like Vanek and Derek Roy, now, of course, it's Ryan Miller's night, and everybody's going to say the nicest things about Ryan Miller. But the sense from them was that Ryan Miller was the backbone and the core of those teams, that they felt like they were a competitive team and had a chance to win because he was in the goal. And and as you covered these teams, he was in the net most every night. He wasn't a goalie that took a lot of games off, and maybe that was Lindy Ruff's decision.
There were injuries here and there, lengthy ones. There was the stretch in which Marty Baron set a record for consecutive wins, I think, or consecutive games without a loss. I'm not right. Not quite remembering it, but so yeah, he was out for extended periods of time. But no, it was not like Hasek with the Red Wings, where he was missing months, or you couldn't count on him. You knew that as soon as he was ready, he was going to come back. I will say this, I want to point out, because I was watching the broadcast during one of the breaks. I don't recall if it was an intermission or if it was the time in between the ceremony and the game starting. There was a discussion with, about the year that was spent in Rochester during the 04-05 lockout. And those guys were galvanized. Vanek, Pominville, Miller, you name it, that crew that came up together. Stafford, I think. Did I say Roy? But there was a group, and Rob Ray says, and it was amazing. And when that lockout ended, you could pretty much just bring that entire team up and drop them right in there. And they were just ready to go. And he said there were some other pieces too, but I was like, other pieces, only the two captains, and, the fact that's like other pieces, the head coach, it's like, let's not overwrite the history here. I think that's maybe what had me wondering about the hagiography of Ryan Miller last night. I think it's all deserved, but there were a couple of things where I was like,
Yeah, and well, that's what we do as journalists, but I think that's what makes it fun for the fans to kind of buy into these fairy tales and narratives as the years go by, as to was this magical time, and Ryan Miller was the best goalie in the NHL and the best goalie that Buffalo could ever ask for, and it was, a bygone glory day era, and hopefully the Sabres can get back to that. And people probably don't remember some of the, the Mr. Softy goals, or the disappointing Sabres games and seasons and aspects of that era. They remember the good times more than the bad times. And as journalists and covering the team, we're supposed to, kind of give the holistic approach. But for the fans, I think it's okay to have fuzzy memories and only remember the good feelings when this amount of time has passed. And I think you got that a little bit from Ryan Miller. Now, he was playing in other teams in other parts of the country, but he's talked about how he didn't come back to Buffalo for many years. Now he's been back for the Greater Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame induction, and prior to that, when they introduced the class, and here for this banner raising ceremony. And he's talked about reconnecting with the franchise and trying to come back more often. And you see that with a lot of Sabres players, especially hockey players in this area, and how close it is to Canada. But they seem to, a lot of Sabres, they seem to like being part of the organization in retirement almost more than they like being part of the organization as players. And you're seeing that continue again with Ryan Miller.
Well, again, that goes into the revisionist history, especially during shortly after Terry Pegula bought the Sabres and they started to lose. Everybody started to remember Tom Golisano as the most awesome owner. People hated Tom Golisano at the end. People were ecstatic when Terry Pegula bought the team and got rid of Larry Quinn and Dan DePofi. And now everybody looks back on those wistful Golisano years.
But it's funny how that played out, because there was so much criticism of Golisano and Darcy Regier and not spending money and not being aggressive enough. And Terry Pegula comes in, and over the years, they've spent a lot of money and they've been aggressive, and they've tried to build up this roster and do different things to build a championship team. And they've had a lot less success than the financially prudent Darcy Regier strategy had in a previous era.
Jonah, I think maybe we wrap it here.
Well, one point I wanted to make, one last point in the game that I thought was.
We didn't talk about the game.
Because as soon as that happened with Ryan Miller, it was an NHL game to play, and we are in the 2022-23 season. But the Sabres continued a trend that goes back to last season, and it's continued into this season of sensing the moment and rising to the occasion.
Yeah, you wrote about this at WIVB.com. I recommend everybody go take a look at it.
Sure. And it was, you talk about the only sellout they had last year, Rick Jenneret, when he had his banner raised, Sabres win that game. The RJ's last call in the season finale, they come back and they win that game in overtime. Jack Eichel's return last year was a big moment for the fan base. They win that game. They didn't do it this year, but that seemed more of a Jack Eichel moment when Vegas came there this time. The 2 season openers, the Heritage Classic game, the first game, but really the first 5 games that they wore these black and red goat head jerseys. The Sabres won all of those games, scored 6 goals in each of those wins. The first game after the blizzard, the first game after DeMar Hamlin's collapse, when they've had big crowds with energy in the building, it seemed to bring out the best in this team. And I think that's a good sign that as this team matures, that they can kick it into another gear, sense the moment. And when it comes down to playoff games or must-win regular season games, maybe not later this season, but later on in the development of this team, I think that's something to watch and something for Sabres fans to be hopeful and confident about, that this team might not win every night, but they seem to have something inside of them that they're going to win the important games, and they're going to, and also to do it for the fans, because some of these games are meaningless in the standings and don't really matter if the Sabres win or lose for the competitive aspect of it, but it means a lot to the people that pay their money and are sitting there and want to have a good feeling. Like that Ryan Miller ceremony is going to be memorable no matter whether the Sabres win that game or not, but it's a lot more memorable when they come back and win the game in overtime and Ryan Miller gets to go celebrate on the ice with them. And had the Sabres played a dud game and lost 4-0, it would have taken a little bit of the steam and the good feeling out of that Ryan Miller event. It would have been kind of a shame if there was a sold out building at 6 o'clock and by the third period, half the crowd had gone home and it was a dull building.
Did you have a chance to talk with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen after the game?
Or I did not. I went down to the locker room and I got Dylan Cousins and Rasmus Dahlin and I went back up.
All right. So I missed it if he was asked this regarding the pressure of, because he let in an early goal, the pressure of on Ryan Miller night being the next young goaltender and watching all these highlights and seeing Dominic Hasek and Daniel Briere and Mike Greer and all these people who are in the league still in either legendary capacities or even managerial capacities, Lindy Ruff and all these teammates, and thinking, everybody loves this guy. And there goes that jersey up into the rafter, up with that other goaltender who used to be here. Now I'm the goaltender, and oh shit. I don't know if that's if there's a weak in the knees moment there where he maybe had to get his footing a little bit before he was able to fully get going.
Yeah, I didn't talk to him and I didn't hear what he said, but he did make some big saves in the third period, including one with about 7 seconds left. He played well. He played well enough for them to win the game, and they've won more often than not when he's been in the net. And then the talk from the players that did, Dahlin called him a monster and said he's been playing very well for them of late. And Don Granato talked about his competitive spirit and letting in that early goal and responding to that and playing better as the game wore on. Now, as the game was going on, it seemed like the story of the game might be the Islanders goalie, Ilya Sorokin, wearing number 30. He finishes with 42 saves, and he almost seemed like he was going to steal the game. And that was going to be the tribute to Ryan Miller, that, he wasn't a Sabre, but there was a Ryan Miller-like performance on the ice that night. It just happened to be for the other team.
Good stuff, Jonah. Well, let's save Big Four basketball for when there's maybe more meaty content, because really not much to talk about Canisius, Niagara,
we can catch up with them.
or
UB's
St. Bonaventure's playing well.
St. Bonaventure and UB are both winning their home games and in the mix in the conference. Probably not going to win the conference, but going to be top half of their leagues if things keep going the way it is. But we can catch up on them another time. I can mention one thing, plug in a little bit of a story I wrote and a thing people might want to pay attention to on Saturday night before the Bills play. You got the Giants playing the Eagles in the NFC playoffs. Some Western New York connections there with Brian Dable being the coach of the Giants. The Eagles coached by Nick Sirianni from Jamestown.
Right.
Dave Caldwell's in the Eagles front office, one of those St. Francis guys in the NFL. And then Brett Kern, punter for the Eagles.
That's right. Yet another Western New York connection.
There's some Western New York rooting interest. Now it's competing Western New York rooting interest. Like maybe you're a Hamburg, West Seneca, St. Francis guy, and you're backing Brian Dable. Or I think there's a lot of Bills fans and Buffalo people.
You can get into a neighborhood rivalries here, not just locals. There's neighborhoods involved.
Right, sure. And then there's Jamestown, southwestern area with the Siriannis. But I think it's cool seeing locals kind of rise to that status. I mean, I tried to figure this out and ask some people, and I couldn't get it ultimately verified, but I believe Nick Sirianni was the first Western New Yorker to be an NFL head coach. Now we have Brian Dable being the second, and to have them both having this kind of success and coaching against each other in the playoffs is kind of a nice moment for the area. And if the Bills don't go to the Super Bowl, maybe there'll be, a Buffalo rooting interest in that game coming out of the NFC.
Right on. Well, thanks, Jonah. Have a great weekend. And everybody listening or watching out there, you have a great weekend too, watching the Sabres and Ducks as a continued Ryan Miller weekend, really, isn't it? Isn't he involved in some other stuff going around? I think he's going to be up in the booth maybe and talking about his two former teams.
Right. Yeah, I didn't actually recognize that. But yeah, he does have how would you call this? A beer in his likeness being released by Resurgence, and there's a party for that after the game tomorrow. So I think that, and then that's probably part of whatever promotion he'll be doing at the game. So yeah, it's Ryan Miller weekend. It is kind of interesting. Maybe they should have done the banner in the game against the Anaheim Ducks, but it seemed like
maybe they
the right
think that it's easier to sell tickets on Saturday than on a Thursday. RJ night was on a Thursday too, if I recall.
True. Yeah, Saturday games tend to draw decent crowds, but tomorrow's youth hockey day. I don't know if that is a factor for or against doing something like that. But they sold out the building, and it was, I think, every bit of the event that the Sabres and Ryan Miller and the fans wanted it to be. So I really can't complain that they should have done it on a different day.
All right, Jonah. See you at the bar somewhere this weekend, I'm sure.
All right.
Thanks to everyone out there for listening/watching Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and business consultants. CTBK is more than just a full-service accounting firm. They are one team with an innovative approach that takes on each new challenge with collaborative problem-solving skills to provide creative solutions for their clients. Based right here in Western New York, CTBK is a champion for your business in our community. Additionally, CTBK goes beyond tax and attest services by offering a wide array of consulting and outsourced solutions tailored to meet the unique needs of your business, allowing you to focus on your operational and long-term strategic goals. Whether you're a large corporation, a small business, or somewhere in between, the team at CTBK is determined to help you succeed. Visit ctbk.com or call 716-630-2400. 716-630-2400 to learn how CTBK's one-team approach can work for you.